Good evening. You've arrived at a quiet place meant for rest. There's nothing you need to focus on here. Nothing to solve. Nothing to understand fully. This is a calm science story, told slowly. It's designed to remain in the background, steady and predictable as the night continues. You don't need to listen closely. You don't need to follow every sentence. If your attention drifts, that's completely fine. Right now, your body is already doing what it knows how to do. Breathing continues without effort. Your weight is supported by the surface beneath you. There's no instruction to follow and no change required. This isn't a story that builds towards something important. It doesn't rely on sequence or memory. Nothing later depends on what comes before. Everything you'll hear is based on well-established scientific understanding. Not ideas meant to impress, not explanations meant to surprise. Just observations that have been measured, tested, and repeated over time. Will be shared softly, without urgency, because nothing being described is happening quickly. If sleep arrives at any point, that's expected. If it doesn't, there's no problem with that either. Nothing here depends on an outcome. The voice you're hearing isn't here to guide you somewhere new. It's here to remain steady, consistent enough that your mind doesn't need to stay alert. You may notice pauses between phrases. Those pauses are intentional. They're part of the rhythm, allowing space between thoughts without asking anything of you. As the minutes pass, the tone will remain even. There will be no sudden changes, no shifts in pace, no moments that require attention. You can let the words come and go on their own. They don't need to form clear images. They don't need to make sense in detail. Some sentences may blur together. Others may fade before they're finished. That's completely fine. For now, all that matters is that you're here, resting. Listening if you want to, not listening if you don't. The science will unfold quietly in the background, slowly, evenly, just as the night does. As you continue resting, there's no need to adjust your position unless your body naturally wants to. If you're already comfortable, stillness can remain just as it is. Breathing is happening on its own. You don't need to guide it. You don't need to make it slower or deeper. Each breath arrives and then leaves without effort. The body doesn't need to be relaxed in a specific way. It doesn't need to feel light or heavy. It only needs to be supported. You may notice the surface beneath you carrying your weight evenly. The bed, the couch, or the floor is already doing its work. There's nothing you need to hold in place. The muscles in your face may begin to soften on their own. The space around the eyes, the jaw resting without being held, the tongue settling naturally without direction. There's no need to release tension deliberately. Nothing needs to be fixed or corrected. The nervous system understands how to move toward rest when the environment remains quiet and predictable. Your shoulders can remain where they are. They don't need to drop or shift. Gravity is already present, steady and unchanged, supporting them without urgency. The arms rest in whatever position they've taken. They don't need symmetry. They don't need to feel a certain way. They're simply part of the body, resting along with everything else. Breathing continues at a pace that suits you. That pace may change slightly from moment to moment. This happens naturally, without attention. Lower in the body, the abdomen moves gently with each breath. There's no need to hold it in, no need to control it. It responds on its own to pressure and release. your legs are supported fully. Their weight is already being carried. There's nothing to balance and nothing to maintain. The feet don't require attention. They don't need warmth or tingling or any particular sensation. They can remain at the far end of the body, quiet and unremarkable. As these sensations remain steady, the brain begins to notice the absence of demand. There's no task waiting, no response required, no change expected. This is often when mental activity starts to slow, not because it's being forced to, but because there's nothing pressing to react to. Thoughts may still appear, fragments of the day, images, unfinished sentences. They don't need to be pushed away. They don't need to be followed. They can pass through the mind the way sounds pass through a quiet room, present for a moment, then gone. If your attention drifts away from these words, that's completely fine. The body doesn't need continuous input. It responds just as well to consistency and tone. The voice you're hearing isn't here to guide you somewhere specific. It's here to remain steady, predictable enough that your internal systems can continue settling at their own pace. There's nowhere else to be, nothing else to prepare for. The night doesn't require readiness. You can continue resting exactly as you are, breathing, supported, unchanged. The body already knows how to do this. As the body remains supported and steady, attention often becomes less focused on specific sensations. It can begin to open into a more general sense of stillness. There isn't a clear line between being awake and resting deeply. Instead, there's a gradual shift, one that happens quietly, without needing to be noticed. In the natural world, many processes unfold in this same way, not through sudden changes, but through slow transitions that are easy to overlook. Light fades gradually as evening becomes night. There's no single moment when day ends. The change happens through small adjustments spread across time. Temperature follows a similar pattern. Air cools little by little. The difference is subtle from one minute to the next, but noticeable over longer periods. Sound often softens as well. Activity decreases. Distances feel larger. The environment becomes quieter without anything needing to be turned off. These shifts don't require coordination. They don't respond to observation. They continue whether or not anyone is paying attention. The body is familiar with this kind of rhythm. It developed in environments shaped by repetition and slow variation, rather than constant demand. Because of that, predictable patterns tend to feel safe. They don't signal urgency. They don't require quick decisions. In many areas of science, this same principle appears again and again. Large systems often move slowly, guided by consistent forces rather than sudden impulses. Once set in motion, these systems continue along stable paths, sometimes for years, sometimes for much longer. They don't need correction, they don't require supervision. They persist simply because the conditions around them remain steady. When scientists describe processes like these, the explanations are usually simple at their core. The details can become complex, but the underlying ideas remain consistent. This consistency is part of what makes them calming to listen to. There's nothing hidden behind the description, no surprise waiting to appear, just continuity. In the background of daily life, countless slow processes are always underway. They don't interrupt. They don't compete for attention. They form a quiet foundation beneath faster events. The mind doesn't need to track them closely. It only needs to recognize that they're there, ongoing, unaffected by momentary changes. This kind of awareness doesn't sharpen focus, it softens it. There's no need to picture specific scenes or hold clear images. If images appear on their own, they can pass naturally. What matters more is the sense of gradual movement, the feeling of things progressing at a pace that doesn't rush toward an outcome. In this state, time can begin to feel less structured. Minutes don't need to be counted. There's no sequence to follow. The voice continues in the same even way. Not to hold attention, but to provide a constant reference point, something steady enough that the mind doesn't need to stay alert. This is often when thinking becomes less verbal, less organized around words, not because it stops entirely, but because it no longer needs to arrange itself around tasks or decisions. Rest doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in layers, first in the body, then in the breath, and gradually in the spaces between thoughts. You don't need to notice when that happens. There's no moment to mark. The process continues on its own, and the quiet science story will continue too, moving at the same unhurried pace as the natural systems it describes. As attention continues to soften, it becomes easier to notice systems that operate far beyond the scale of everyday experience. Systems that remain active without interruption, not as events, but as conditions. One of these systems is the sun. The sun is often thought of as a distant object, separate from daily life. But its presence is continuous. It does not turn on and off. It does not pause. Every moment, energy leaves the sun and moves outward through space. This happens quietly, without sound, without variation that can be felt from one moment to the next. The sun does not send energy in bursts meant to be noticed. It emits it steadily as part of its ongoing state. At its core, physical processes continue under stable conditions. These processes do not speed up or slow down based on observation. They proceed at a pace set by balance. Because of this stability, the sun becomes easy to overlook. It feels constant, predictable. From Earth, this consistency is experienced as daylight returning each morning, warmth that changes gradually through the day, light that fades without urgency in the evening. These changes are familiar. They don't demand attention. They repeat. Beyond visible light, the sun also releases streams of energy that move outward in all directions. This release is continuous, not dramatic, not sudden. It does not behave like an explosion. It behaves like a slow, ongoing flow. Scientists observe this energy leaving the sun at all times. It does not require special conditions to begin. It does not wait for a signal. Once released, it travels through space at a steady pace. It does not rush toward Earth. It does not adjust its path. It simply moves outward, carried by the conditions around it. Space, at this scale, is not empty in the way it often appears. It provides a medium where motion continues without friction, without resistance that would cause sudden change. Because of this, energy from the sun can travel for long distances. It spreads gradually, evenly. From the perspective of a single night on Earth, nothing about this process changes. The sun remains where it is. The energy continues to flow. There is no need to imagine what this energy looks like. No need to picture shapes or movement. It's enough to recognize that the process exists, quietly ongoing, independent of awareness. This kind of steady activity is common in large systems. Once conditions are established, motion continues without effort. The sun does not monitor its output. It does not adjust based on outcomes. It remains stable because the forces within it remain balanced. For the mind, listening to descriptions of such systems can feel grounding, not because they are impressive, but because they are reliable. Nothing unexpected is happening. Nothing needs to be anticipated. The energy continues to move outward. The sun continues to exist in the same state. And on Earth, far from the source, the effects of this steady process unfold slowly, over long periods of time, in ways that do not announce themselves. As the night continues, there's no need to track any of this, no need to follow the path of energy through space. The details are not important here. What matters is the sense of continuity, of something ongoing, unchanged from one moment to the next. The sun remains present, doing what it has always done, and the quiet science story can continue from there. As energy continues to leave the sun, it does not remain concentrated in one place. It spreads outward, carried through space in a steady, ongoing way. This outward movement is known as the solar wind. Despite the name, it is not a wind in the way air moves across Earth. There is no gusting, no sudden shifts in direction. The term is simply a way of describing continuous motion. The solar wind is made up of very small particles. They carry energy and electrical charge. They move outward from the sun in all directions, all the time. This motion does not begin with an event. It does not require a trigger. It is part of the sun's normal, balanced state. Scientists observe this flow as something persistent. It varies slightly over time, but never stops. From one moment to the next, the change is subtle. Over longer periods, patterns become visible. But on the scale of a single night, the solar wind feels constant, unchanging. Once these particles leave the sun, they continue moving through space. They are not pulled back. They are not redirected by intention. They follow paths shaped by existing conditions, by motion already in progress, by forces that act evenly and without urgency. Space allows this movement to continue smoothly. There is no friction to slow it suddenly, no surface to collide with. Because of this, the solar wind can travel great distances. It does not hurry. It does not pause. An analogy can sometimes be helpful here, not as a literal description, but as a way to imagine scale. You might think of the solar wind like a very slow current, moving through a wide, open area. The current doesn't rush. It doesn't surge forward. It simply continues. This is only an analogy. The solar wind does not behave like water, but the idea of steady motion without effort can be useful. As the solar wind moves outward, it fills the space around the sun. It becomes part of the environment through which planets travel. Earth is always within this flow, not passing in and out of it, but remaining immersed in it. This does not mean the solar wind is always noticeable. Most of the time, its presence is subtle. From the surface of Earth, nothing feels different from one moment to the next. The flow does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. Scientists studied the solar wind by measuring its properties over time: speed, density, direction. These measurements show gradual variation, not sudden change. They confirm that the process is ongoing and stable. The solar wind does not aim for Earth. It does not seek interaction. It simply moves outward, filling space evenly. When it encounters something in its path, the interaction is shaped by structure, not reaction. by the way matter and energy respond under fixed conditions. Nothing about this process requires decision or control. It unfolds because the conditions allow it to. This kind of motion is common in large physical systems. Once energy is released in a balanced way, it continues moving until something redirects it, not because it wants to, but because that is how motion behaves. As the night continues, the solar wind is still moving, not faster, not slower. It remains part of the background, present, but easy to ignore. There is no need to imagine where it is going, no need to follow its path. The important thing is its steadiness, its lack of urgency. It is one more example of a process that does not require attention in order to continue. And as the story moves forward, this quiet motion will become part of a larger, equally steady system, one that surrounds Earth and remains in place, unchanged, as the night passes. As the solar wind continues its steady movement through space, it does not travel through emptiness alone. Around Earth, there is an existing structure that shapes how this motion unfolds. This structure is Earth's magnetic field. It is not something that turns on or off. It does not activate in response to events. It is simply there, extending outward from the planet in a stable pattern. Earth's magnetic field forms because of motion deep within the planet. In the core, material moves slowly under conditions of heat and pressure. This motion generates a magnetic influence that extends far beyond the surface. The process is continuous. It does not depend on awareness. It does not require adjustment. The magnetic field surrounds Earth in a broad, invisible region. It does not create a solid boundary. It does not form a wall. Instead, it provides structure. When charged particles move through space, their paths are shaped by magnetic fields. Not abruptly, not forcefully. The influence is gradual. It bends motion rather than stopping it. This means that when the solar wind reaches the region around Earth, it does not encounter resistance in the usual sense. There is no collision like an object hitting a surface. Instead, motion is redirected smoothly. Paths curve, patterns form. This interaction happens continuously, not as an event, not as a response. Earth's magnetic field does not react. It does not strengthen or weaken in the moment. It remains present because the conditions that create it remain present. From one second to the next, nothing changes in a noticeable way. The structure stays in place. The motion continues. Because the magnetic field is invisible, it is easy to imagine it incorrectly. It is sometimes described as a barrier or a protective layer. But this language can be misleading. The magnetic field is not a shield that blocks. It is a structure that shapes. Charged particles are guided by it. Their motion becomes organized rather than chaotic. This organization happens without intention, without awareness. It is simply the outcome of physical conditions interacting over time. Earth moves through space continuously. It rotates, it orbits. The magnetic field moves with it, maintaining the same broad structure. This means that the interaction between Earth and the solar wind is always underway, not something that starts or stops. Most of the time, nothing about this interaction is noticeable at the surface. There is no sound, no sensation. The atmosphere remains calm. Life continues without interruption. Scientists study Earth's magnetic field by observing how it affects moving particles, by mapping its shape, by tracking gradual changes over long periods. These observations show stability, small variations spread across years, not sudden shifts. On the timescale of a single night, the magnetic field is constant. It does not require monitoring. It does not demand attention. For the mind, descriptions of structures like this can feel settling, not because they are dramatic, but because they are dependable. Nothing is being decided. Nothing is being corrected. The solar wind continues moving. Earth's magnetic field continues shaping that motion. Both processes unfold together, quietly, evenly. There is no need to picture this interaction clearly, no need to visualize lines or shapes. It's enough to know that the structure exists, that it remains in place, that it allows motion to continue in an organized way. As the story continues, this steady interaction will lead to a visible effect. Not suddenly, not everywhere, only under certain conditions, in specific regions. But even then, the process itself remains calm, guided by the same stable forces, and nothing about it requires your attention now. When the steady flow of particles from the Sun reaches the region around Earth, most of it continues past without noticeable effect. The motion remains smooth, redirected gently by the structure already in place. In certain areas, however, the conditions allow a small portion of this energy to move closer to the planet. This happens near the polar regions. Here, Earth's magnetic field curves inward toward the surface. The structure becomes more open. Paths that were once wide begin to narrow. Charged particles following these paths are guided downward, not pulled suddenly, not accelerated in a dramatic way. Their motion remains controlled, gradual. As these particles move into the upper atmosphere, they begin to interact with gases already present there. The atmosphere at these heights is very thin. Molecules are spread far apart. Collisions are infrequent, but they do occur. When a charged particle transfers energy to a gas molecule, the molecule briefly enters a higher energy state. This is not a permanent change. It does not damage the molecule. After a short time, the molecule returns to its usual state. As it does, the extra energy is released. That release can appear as light. This process does not happen all at once. It does not move across the sky like a wave. It occurs continuously across many small interactions. Spread over wide regions, different gases respond in slightly different ways. Oxygen and nitrogen are the most common participants at these heights. Each type of molecule releases energy in a specific range. This determines the color of the light that can be observed. These colors are not chosen. They are not produced for effect. They are simply the result of physical properties behaving consistently under the same conditions. The particles do not seek out the atmosphere. The gases do not react. The interaction happens because motion and structure intersect. From moment to moment, the overall process remains steady. Individual particles come and go. The larger pattern continues. There is no single point where the aurora begins, no clear boundary where it ends. It forms wherever the conditions align, quietly, without intention. Most of the time, this activity remains subtle, too faint to notice, too diffuse to draw attention. Only when the alignment persists does the effect become visible, and even then, the underlying process remains unchanged. It is still the same steady motion, the same structure, the same interaction, repeating itself. When these interactions occur repeatedly over time, a larger pattern can become visible, not as a single shape, but as many small points of light appearing together. The exact appearance depends on conditions that are already in place, the type of particles involved, the altitude where interactions occur, the structure of Earth's magnetic field in that region. None of these factors change suddenly. They shift gradually, over minutes, sometimes over hours. Because of this, the visible patterns often seem to move slowly. They do not rush across the sky. They drift. The motion is not driven by intention. It reflects ongoing interactions continuing in slightly different locations. Some regions appear brighter than others. This does not mean more energy is being released at once. It means that similar interactions are happening in closer proximity. The shapes that form are not fixed. They do not repeat exactly from one moment to the next. They emerge, they soften, they fade. Then similar patterns form again nearby. This repetition gives the impression of flow, but the underlying process remains the same. At higher altitudes, oxygen is more likely to be involved. At lower altitudes, nitrogen plays a larger role. These differences influence which wavelengths of light are released. The variation is subtle, predictable. No additional mechanism is required to explain this. The same principles apply each time. The particles arrive, energy is transferred, light is released. The system returns to its prior state. Nothing is consumed, nothing is depleted. The process can continue as long as the conditions remain aligned. Most of the time, these conditions are only partially met. The activity remains faint, barely noticeable. At other times, alignment lasts longer. The interactions persist. The light becomes easier to see. Even then, there is no escalation, no peak that needs to be reached. The aurora does not build toward an outcome. It does not complete a cycle. It simply appears when it appears, and fades when conditions change. The motion remains slow. The repetition continues. For the brain, this kind of pattern requires no response. There is nothing to interpret, nothing to anticipate. It is a visible result of steady systems interacting calmly. The solar wind continues. Earth's magnetic field remains in place. The atmosphere responds as it always has. Each part plays the same role, over and over. And as this understanding settles, the details no longer need to be followed closely. The explanation does not need to be remembered. The process will continue whether or not it is observed. Quietly, consistently, just as it has for a very long time. By now, there is no need to keep track of what has already been said. Nothing here depends on remembering details. The processes being described do not change when they are not followed. They continue in the same way whether or not they are noticed. The sun remains steady. The solar wind continues its quiet movement through space. Earth's magnetic field stays in place. Where conditions align, light appears briefly in the upper atmosphere. Where they do not, nothing changes. These facts do not require further explanation. There is nothing new to learn from here on, no additional concepts to follow. The information does not become more complex. The repetition is intentional. When information stops changing, the mind no longer needs to stay alert. It can rest without monitoring. This is often the point where attention begins to soften further. Words may still be heard, but they no longer need to be interpreted. They can remain as sound, moving at a steady pace, without forming clear ideas. The body remains supported. Breathing continues on its own. Nothing has shifted suddenly. The environment is unchanged. There is no signal that something important is about to happen. No moment that needs to be anticipated. The same ideas return gently, not to reinforce meaning, but to maintain rhythm. The solar wind continues moving, not faster, not slower. Earth remains within its magnetic structure, unaltered. The upper atmosphere responds in the same way it always has. Particles arrive, energy is exchanged, light appears briefly, and then fades. These patterns do not progress toward an ending. They repeat. If sleep arrives now, nothing is missed. The story does not rely on sequence. If awareness fades, it fades naturally. If it returns briefly later, it can drift again just as easily. There is no correct way to experience this moment. Some nights, rest arrives quickly. Other nights, it settles in layers. Both are normal. The body does not need instruction. The mind does not need reassurance. The steady rhythm is enough. From this point forward, the pace will remain the same. The tone will not change. No new information will be introduced. The words will continue, but their role is different now. They are no longer carrying explanation. They are simply maintaining continuity. You do not need to follow them any further. The processes being described are already in motion. They will continue without effort. And as the repetition continues, there is space for sleep to settle quietly, without being noticed. After this point, the details no longer need to be clear. The explanation does not need to be complete. What remains is repetition. The same processes, described again in a softer way. Auroras do not appear everywhere on Earth. They are more common near the polar regions. This is not because those places are special. It is because the structure of Earth's magnetic field guides motion there more easily. In the north, this light is often called the Aurora Borealis. In the south, it is known as the Aurora Australis. The names are different. The process is the same. Charged particles continue to move outward from the sun. Earth's magnetic field continues shaping that motion. The upper atmosphere continues responding in the same quiet way. Sometimes the alignment lasts only a short time. The light remains faint. It may never be noticed. At other times, the alignment persists. The same interactions repeat in nearby regions. The light becomes easier to see. This does not mean something new has occurred. It means the same conditions have remained in place a little longer. The patterns that appear are not fixed. They shift slowly. They soften. They fade. Then similar patterns appear again. This slow change is not a movement toward anything. It does not build. It does not resolve. It simply reflects small differences in where interactions are taking place. Some auroras appear higher in the atmosphere. Others form lower. This changes which gases are involved more often, and that can influence which colors are more noticeable. The variation is gentle, predictable. Nothing about this process requires adjustment. The solar wind does not increase its effort. Earth's magnetic field does not respond. The atmosphere does not react. Everything continues behaving as it always has. Over long periods of time, these variations repeat, night after night, season after season. They are part of the same steady interaction. From one moment to the next, there is no clear boundary, no starting point, no ending, only continuation. At this stage, there is no need to remember names or locations, no need to picture the sky. The information has already served its purpose. What remains is rhythm. The same ideas return quietly. The same processes remain in motion. They do not become more important. They do not change direction. They continue, whether or not they are followed. As the repetition settles in, attention can soften further. Words can pass without forming meaning. The explanation does not need to be held. The aurora continues when conditions allow, and fades when they do not. The sun remains steady. Earth remains in place. The interaction remains calm, and nothing about it needs to be noticed now. Beyond what can be noticed from one night to the next, the interaction between the sun and Earth also follows longer rhythms. These rhythms do not unfold quickly. They are measured across years rather than moments. Scientists observe that the sun's activity changes gradually over time, not abruptly, not without cause. These changes form broad cycles. They rise slowly. They settle slowly. No single moment marks their beginning or their end. During some periods, the flow of energy from the sun is slightly more active. During others, it becomes quieter. The difference is subtle when viewed up close. Only when measured across long stretches of time do these variations become clear. Earth's magnetic field remains present throughout these cycles. Its structure does not disappear. It continues shaping motion in the same general way. The atmosphere responds as it always has. Particles arrive, energy is exchanged. Light appears briefly when conditions align. Over many years, the frequency of visible auroras may change slightly, not because the process itself is different, but because the surrounding conditions shift slowly. These shifts do not interrupt the system. They do not redirect it. They simply adjust the background in which the same interactions continue. Scientists describe these patterns using observation rather than prediction. They look back across recorded data. They compare measurements taken over decades. What emerges is not a story of events, but a record of consistency. The same physical principles apply across all of these timescales. They do not become more complex. They do not require new explanations. Only the pace changes. On a human timescale, these rhythms feel distant. They do not influence daily experience. They do not require awareness. From one evening to the next, nothing noticeable shifts. The sun remains present. Earth continues moving through space. The magnetic field remains in place. The interaction continues quietly. For the mind, thinking about processes that unfold this slowly can reduce the sense of urgency. There is no moment to prepare for, no outcome to anticipate. Change happens without pressure. The system does not hurry. It does not aim for completion. It simply continues. At this point, the details no longer matter. The timescales do not need to be tracked. What remains is the sense of duration, of movement spread thinly across time. The same interaction has been occurring long before this night began, and it will continue long after. Nothing here depends on attention. Nothing requires effort. The long rhythm remains steady, and the words can continue to soften into the background. Nothing in the system has changed. The sun continues in the same steady state. The solar wind moves outward without urgency. Earth's magnetic field remains in place. The interaction between them does not shift direction. It does not accelerate. It does not pause. The same processes are still underway. They are not moving toward a conclusion. Where conditions align, light appears briefly in the upper atmosphere. Where they do not, nothing is visible. This has been true throughout the night. It remains true now. There is no signal that something new is about to happen. No transition to prepare for. The repetition is intentional. Repetition creates stability, and stability allows the body to remain at rest. Breathing continues on its own. The body stays supported. Nothing needs to be held in place. If thoughts appear, they do not require attention. They can pass without being followed. If awareness drifts away, it does not need to return. The voice remains consistent. Its role does not change. There is no new information to process, nothing to remember. The explanation does not progress forward. It simply maintains the same rhythm. This is often where listening becomes effortless, where words lose their edges, where meaning softens into tone. Nothing important is happening, and that is enough. The sun does not respond to being noticed. Earth's magnetic field does not adjust to attention. The atmosphere does not change when it is observed. Everything continues because it is already in motion. The same is true here. The night does not ask for participation. It allows rest. You do not need to follow this any further. The steady repetition is sufficient. Everything that matters is already in place. The rhythm continues. Nothing shifts, nothing resolves. The sun remains where it is. The steady flow of energy continues outward. Earth's magnetic field stays in place. The same quiet interaction continues in the upper atmosphere. Particles arrive, energy is exchanged, light appears briefly, and then fades. There's no change in pace, no signal marking the passage of time. The voice remains present, but it does not ask to be followed. Words arrive, then soften. Some do not need to be completed. The space between them is enough. Breathing continues on its own. There is no need to notice it. The body remains supported. Nothing needs to be held or corrected. If sleep has already arrived, the story continues without needing to be heard. If awareness returns briefly, it can drift again just as easily. Nothing here depends on attention. The processes being described do not change when they are not observed. They do not slow down. They do not speed up. They continue at the same pace they always have. There is no conclusion waiting, no final thought to reach. The night does not move toward an ending. It simply unfolds. The repetition remains gentle. The tone remains even. There is no reason to stay awake for what comes next. The words are no longer carrying information. They are only carrying rhythm. That rhythm does not need to be understood. It can remain quietly in the background, like distant motion, like slow cycles that do not announce themselves. Nothing more is required. The night continues, the motion continues, and the quiet remains.